Welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessie CHAHAL. We often look at data for clear answers, but what if these numbers that we see or look at are telling us only half the story, half the truth? A recent call from the Market Research Society of Malaysia highlighted the risks of relying on headline figures without the wider context, warning that selective data can lead to flawed decisions and weaken public trust. So how do we make sure that the data that we really rely on actually reflects the reality on the ground? Well, joining me today for this discussion is Sito Wahyu, the CEO of Central Force International. He's also the president of the Market Research Society of Malaysia. Welcome to the program, Wahyu. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, as we talk about research, you argue that even technically accurate data can sometimes still tell half the story or an incomplete story. How does that even happen?
So the thing is that the data might be collected accurately, right? So you could have the right sampling, you could have the right data collection, you could have the right analysis. But how it tells half the story is if when the data owner chooses to omit part of the story. So for example, if we say something like everybody, or rather a huge portion of the population agrees that sustainable products are good, but using that headline alone, that information alone, that will lead companies to think that, oh, I should produce more sustainable products, I should produce more green products. But the next part of that full story in the data says that only 60% are willing to pay no more than 10% for it. You know, so when you have the complete story, it changes how organizations want to behave or choose to behave.
Yeah.
But if you only tell just one part of it, then it changes how, you know, we want to react. And sometimes we react incorrectly because some of the data only shows half of the full story.
Right, and my presumption is that that is probably happening a lot on many different levels, whether from industries or from certain business sectors into academic, research, so on and so forth. Do you see a lot of that happening, or in terms of research, when you look at these things and these half headlines, do you see a lot of that prevalent, and especially with the rise of AI?
So we do. We see a lot of times where I think end of the day, the headline is always there to attract readers, viewers' attention. It's a hook, yes. The fear here is that where is the transparency in all of this? How much do people know about what's happening? Do they know who was actually surveyed? Do they know how the data was collected? Do they know what questions were even asked in the first place? All these things matters in telling the full story. So this is something that we see a lot lacking in today, not only in the research industry, but also in different industries across.
Right, so we often see 1% or one national average generally used to represent an entire society or segment, and that is generalizing, I think, the approach as well. When does a headline become too simplistic to support a major decision? How do we navigate that?
When the headline doesn't tell you what happened in the background. So I'll give you an example of a study that Central Force did recently. So we conducted an opinion poll across nationwide Malaysia, and the headline that came out of that was we asked respondents, who would you like to see as the next Prime Minister? Right? Or who would you prefer to be the next Prime Minister?
That's a good question. I'm curious about the answer.
It's exciting, right, given the whole situation right now. The leading figure with 29% of the votes was actually Syed Saddiq, who led that question. However, the important part of that data is that majority of the people who vote or who picked Syed Saddiq were actually the youth, who were between 18 to 25 years old, and they made up the bulk of that 29%. So this is an example, right? If you don't know what was the background behind that data point, then you won't know what is the full story.
But how that research is conducted is also important and can weigh in heavily on the results or the findings. Your respondents, are they a mixed pool or a concentrated pool? And for a result like that, for example, from the 18 to 25 age segment, if you move with the next decade or so, they are already voters, but they will also become more active in deciding for the country, in contributing to the country?
So you're exactly right. The first part and the most important part is how was the data collected in the first place. In our research, it was a probabilistic sample. It was conducted across the whole country, and we did a total sample size of 1,000. Right, so it's a sizable sample. But many other studies do not. Many other studies is just convenient. Let me interview or survey my friends. Let me interview students. These are all very biased and skewed towards a certain demographic. So this is where we have to be careful about how the data was collected in the first place. And to move on to your next point, it does move with generations, right? But it's important for people to know that generations change their behaviors as they age. I might behave and decide on a certain mindset right now, but 5 years from now, when my circumstances change.
So research and fact-finding within research is quite dynamic in that aspect, that it's not set in stone and it can evolve.
Research paints a picture at that point in time. So just like how we take a photograph, we are taking a still image of that person at that point in time. Research does the same thing.
But I think many of us make that mistake of trusting completely that image or that snapshot or that factual point in time. When you mix that with what AI is being fed and what it's churning out and giving us, as we trust in AI so much, how do decision makers reconcile with the fact of what is technically correct, accurate, appropriate, time sensitive, but then also how can you use that as product for your services?
What's important here is to look at things holistically. I think, just like how I said, everything captures a specific point in time, but it also measures a specific topic. If the question that I surveyed asked you about what do you think about the country's economy, I'm asking you about the economy specifically, right? So what I need to do now is I need to take all these different data points and look at them in totality.
So it's the questions that we ask that are important. When was the research conducted? What were the findings? How was the research conducted? What is the time frame it's looking at? What was the political situation at that point? The economical situation, and so on. Do you have a checklist when you look at research?
Oh yes. So the first thing and most important thing that I will always ask when I see a data point is that true? Or how true is that, right? And then that will lead me to a few other questions. Who was surveyed in the first place, right? And of course, how was it conducted? When was it done? And in what circumstances was it done? So for example, in a time of...
who paid for the research?
Who paid for the research, yes. But like for example, when there's a war going on, right? And there's volatility, there's uncertainty in the world, people will react differently, right? Versus 5 years or 6 years ago before COVID and everything was stable and nice.
But that answers to those questions are not readily available to the general person. So how do we go about digging that?
So information is key, right? And I think we have moved on from the eras of World War where it depends on technology, right? But today, information is what's the most powerful asset a person can have. So in order to have information, this is why it's so heavily funded, right? A lot of organizations actually fund research so that they have access to the latest data, the latest information to make a decision. And so what the public can do is to scrutinize the data that they see, right? If they see a piece of information, don't take it at face value. Look behind it, try and see how it was conducted, who funded it, what was it about, and then that will give you a wider understanding of should I trust this data or not.
But that seems like something we'll need to be doing every time we scroll our phones or even read articles or news online, because it generally never can give you a full picture.
It's an interesting dynamic, right? If you think about it, if let's say your son or your daughter approached you and gave you a piece of information, you would question him or her, right? You would ask him, how do you know? Who told you? How do you find out?
Very true.
But why is it that when AI gives us something or we read an article online, we just accept it for what it is? So I think that's an interesting dynamic here, right? That we treat different sources of information differently. But that is also something that we also research on, right? Where does the information come from and how do we act more confidently on that piece of data?
You say you're not too excited about the fact that AI is being slapped across everything these days, and being in the business of data and information research, where do you sit with AI?
AI to me is a tool. At the end of the day, it's a technology, it's a program, it's a software. Somebody sat down, coded it, programmed it, and made it do what he or she wanted it to do. That is what AI is. The thing about AI is that it's only as good as the data that it knows or it has. So if we upload potentially false data or unreliable data, and we use that to train this AI model, that AI is going to keep on regurgitating false information. And that is a danger that we have to be aware of, right? If something was not trained with the right data set, we're gonna constantly rely on false and inaccurate data to proceed and work with our lives.
And then we ask the data, is this information accurate? And then you just go round and round in that. But let's dig deeper. You say research should challenge, associations or organizations, companies, businesses, rather than confirm what they already believe. So challenge it. But what should a good researcher or someone's asking these questions do when the data they find contradicts with what, for example, a client wants to hear, or what sort of response they want to use the research or information for?
So a good researcher, the first thing they should do is to scrutinize their own data, right? Look through what has been done, look through the methodology, look through the steps and procedures that was done to provide this piece of insight. And if that researcher is confident that everything was done correctly and accurately, then do not be afraid to tell the client that, hey, this is the reality of things. Sometimes it is not about reconfirming the client's good points, right? But sometimes it is the negative news that brings out the true valuable insights that a client needs to listen to, because this is things that you can use to improve their business.
Zooming into Malaysia and our habits or perhaps biasness, what are the mistakes we are making as Malaysians when we deal with research findings and then its application?
The biggest issue that I personally see is the importance that Malaysians place on viral news, on viral information. So the constant sharing of such articles, the spreading of false information without fact checking, that to me I think is one of the biggest dangers that Malaysians constantly practice.
So have we lost our ethical responsibility in that aspect? And because many of it is clickbaity, which is also good for business if you think about it.
I really hope we are not. If we lose our ethics, then who are we as individuals? So that's something that I think organizations and associations has to really enforce. The MRSM, the Society of Market Research in Malaysia, we have a ethical code of conduct that we place onto all of our members, and it's something that we ensure that our members try to be as ethical in the research that they produce for people to read. So that's something that more associations need to adopt and ensure that such things are enforced across their members.
Now, here as well, what we're looking at is the country is experiencing a major data center investment boom, but we're also seeing debate over industry demand, for example, on water, electricity, localities, communities. What is this telling us? Does it illustrate the danger of looking at only the headline in terms of investment, economic growth, without actually measuring the wider impact, how it trickles down to the common man?
The investments always sounds tempting, it always sounds exciting, but that's where survey comes in, right? So for example, if you look at Johor, right, there's a lot of concerns amongst the public that all these data centers is going to draw power to the centers and not enough for the community themselves. This is where public opinion really helps, right? It lets us understand what's the situation on the ground, how do the people feel about these things, and what are the concerns that they might have. And this is for policymakers to weigh the pros and cons, right? Yes, investments are good and important, but is it taking away from the public welfare? And we have to look at it to see does it bring about overall good or overall bad, and which is a better choice to move forward to. There's
the term TMI, which I'm sure you know, too much information. What do we do with that? Is it a good or bad thing, or is it a grey area in terms of too little information leaves us uninformed accurately or completely, and too much information leaves us with too much?
in research, there is never too much information because the more information we have, the more holistic of a view that we can have on certain topics. So what's important here is being able to understand and decipher that information. I think that's something that's lacking in a lot of our people today, right? We're not equipped with the skill set and the expertise to actually read through and comb through the series of data so that we know what to believe in and what we can choose to make our decisions on.
We've also seen this debate play out in terms of centres play out internationally with AI data centre developers in Europe saying that they are increasingly moving towards areas with cheaper land, greater access to energy, while communities and people there are questioning whether there is an environmental cost. How should decision makers weigh economic opportunity against the less visible cost of these projects? I mean, could it be the fact that the approach could be more accurate and specific information?
No. The solution here is to do a proper cost-benefit analysis, right? Weigh the pros and cons. I think most of the time we tend to favor the pros and we tend to de-emphasize the cons. That's not the right way to do research, right? Or to best understand the impact it has on certain things. So when we do an impact study for policymakers, it is always about understanding the full nature of what are the benefits that this will bring, but at the same time, what impact would this cause to different stakeholders, right? We're talking about companies, employees, communities, governments. What are the cons that would apply and what are the greater effects that it will have on the nation? And we use this as a whole to understand, is this a go or a no-go?
Through your research, you have described that the leading indicator is public sentiment. What can public sentiment tell lawmakers, policymakers? What can it tell them that other economic or administrative data may not be able to relay?
Economic indicators such as GDP or unemployment rates, these are past information. This is information based on whatever that has been found and conducted in the past, and that's why we have this, right? So we know that GDP growth is about 5.4% the last year. But what public sentiment tells us, it tells us intentions, it tells us forecasts, and these will ultimately lead to behaviors. So depending on the circumstances of the situation, if a policymaker were to create, or let's say, I think the recent topic was about increasing minimum wage to 3,000, right? The public sentiment will tell us that how favorable are the people to this increase, or what are the effects that it will have, right? Sometimes we have to look at also the business owners as well. They may not be keen to increase their cost because in turn it will affect their prices, it will affect the economy as a whole. So we have to look at different stakeholders and we have to understand what are their intentions and how would they behave and react to certain situations. So that is what sentiments would tell us to do.
Right. We rely heavily on AI to make decisions for us. We even put it in there to suggest the best local food one should try, so on and so forth. And while in terms of entertainment and lifestyle, it can be interesting to interact with AI, when we're looking at research and accurate data-driven facts or findings, it can pose its own risks. When governments are also increasingly relying on data and pushing for AI, who is responsible really for ensuring that that data that's being applied or being used is a complete representative of its people and also it's interpreted correctly?
Responsibility falls on everybody, but accountability has to be true and factual, right? So everybody from the person who created the technology and the AI to the person who uploaded the data sets to the person who analyzes it, everyone needs to have a shared responsibility in ensuring that all of them are ethical in the things that they do. But accountability has to fall onto the data owner who ultimately used that data to make a decision. That's where accountability has to fall under. I cannot choose to put the blame on AI because AI was merely a tool. I was the one that made that decision, so I have to bear the consequences of that decision.
Research is expensive. How do companies and services that are looking to engage with its customers and clients, how do they update their research and keep it alive?
I tell a lot of SMEs the same answer, right? Because we deal a lot, of course, with your MNCs, but we also work a lot with SMEs. And the first thing that I always tell them is conduct your own research, right? End of the day, research doesn't have to be expensive if you know the steps and the right things to do, right? So the first thing that you could always start off with, and I think most people do this, right? We ask our friends, our family, how was my nasi lemak, right? Is it spicy enough? Is it tasty enough?
Start with a mini focus group.
Yes, but move on beyond that, right? Start with your customers, and then move on to the people who probably came and left, right? Why did they stop coming to us? That is the same process that we do, just that we do it on a larger scale. But as an SME business owner, you can always do it within your own circle of people, and that by itself would give you valuable information. The biggest risk is that most SME business owners rely on blind confidence. They always think that they have the best product, the best solution, but they always fail to validate if that is really true.
Speaking of product and solution, clinical research is also important, and with the rise of AI now and businesses online, we see a lot of entrepreneurs, founders pushing their products, whether it's supplements or some sort of one trick wonder. What do you say to that unfounded research and claims?
It falls back down to ethics, right? Everyone should have their own sense and level and standards of ethics. If you can bring yourself to report something that was unfounded, unvalidated, then there is something severely wrong with our education system that allows for people to behave in that manner, right? But at the end of the day, everybody have their own morals, right? And we need to we need to accept the fact that the data and research that we put out is going to be read by millions and millions of people. They're going to make a decision based on that research that we conduct. And if we don't have the ethics and morals to ensure that what we present is factual, is honest, is transparent, then there's something that we have to bear and we have to be aware of.
So in the realm of AI, and while we look at what we can find online through a quick search, which we sometimes claim to be gospel, in all of that, many a times, even I've come across asking or looking for an answer, and it always says not enough research is available on this. And then we go back to the reliance on AI, because AI must know and should know this. What does one do when you're encountered with that, when you're looking for facts and figures when it's not either fully updated or just not available?
So I think the one thing that I have to first of all mention is the dangers of hallucination in AI, right? And just like you say, a lot of people depend on AI like it's the gospel truth, but at the same time, AI is in a way forced to answer you, right? So when it doesn't have the information, it will create stories to give you an answer. What I would advise is go back to the golden days of when AI was not around, right? What happens when you don't have enough information to make a decision? You tend to be a bit more reserved, you'll be a bit more hesitant, you'll be a bit more careful, right? I think that's important. A lot of people now, when they don't have that information, they still move ahead, right, with whatever they wanted to do. But when you don't have information that is crucial to your decision making, you should be a bit more reserved, right? A bit more careful and start to take 2 steps back and see, overall, is this a good or bad choice?
Finally, for the average Malaysian that's scrolling for statistic, a number, looking for survey answers, or even AI generated claims online, what is the one question they should ask before believing that number? And I know you've answered this in a few ways, but how could you sum it up?
I think 3 things are most important here. First thing that everybody should always ask was, who was this survey conducted with? Second thing was how many people actually answered this survey? And the third is, what is the coverage of this survey, right? Is it only looking at a specific demographic, or are we looking at the wider national coverage? These 3 things will give you an answer of how credible and reliable this data point is. And if everyone can just have these 3 questions in mind, we'll move forward to a much more accurate and reliable data society.
Absolutely. Well, data can help us, of course, understand what is happening, but the real challenge is also knowing what the numbers leave out, looking beyond just the headline figures, and asking the right questions is what turns data and information into meaningful insight that can help our businesses and help us with our decision making overall. Well, this has been The Nation. I'm Jessie CHAHAL. Thank you so much for joining me, and of course do keep it locked on to Bernama TV for more conversations on issues that truly matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's really good. I mean, looking at you know,